Every life has a story. Some are told, others wait to be revealed. Stay with us. This is Daily Dose.
What is the price of a name when the weight of 1,000 years of history is suddenly pulled away from beneath your feet? It is a question that many have asked in hushed tones behind the heavy, gilded doors of the palace, but it is one that has now found a cold and startlingly public answer. For a long time, there was a sense that the bond of blood would always provide a safety net, a final layer of protection that no amount of public disagreement or private distance could truly penetrate. We often believe that family is the one institution that can weather any storm, yet we are now witnessing a moment where the institution of the crown and the institution of the family have reached a breaking point that few ever thought possible. The silence that once characterized the relationship between the palace and the West Coast has been replaced by a definitive, loud, and absolute severance. It is a story of how a son became a subject, how a prince became a private citizen, and how a father had to choose between the child he raised and the kingdom he was sworn to protect. The transition began not with a sudden outburst, but with a series of quiet, calculated moves that signaled a shift in the very foundation of the monarchy. For years, the world watched as Prince Harry moved further away from the traditional path, seeking a life defined by his own terms and his own voice. But as the sun rose over London recently, the reality of those choices began to take a shape that was far more permanent than anyone had anticipated. Reports began to circulate that the final threads connecting Prince Harry to the royal establishment were being systematically cut. This was not a suggestion or a temporary measure designed to cool the fires of public opinion. This was described as a total and absolute removal of the titles, the honors, and the very identity that had defined him since the moment of his birth. Here on Daily Dose, we look at the quiet details that often get lost in the noise of the headlines, and the details emerging from this particular moment suggest a level of finality that is almost difficult to process. The decision was not made in a vacuum. It followed a period of intense scrutiny and investigation into the financial and digital footprints left behind in California. According to reporting, federal authorities in the United States had been looking into a series of records that raised significant questions about how charitable funds were being managed and how the royal brand was being utilized for commercial gain. For the palace, the discovery of these inquiries was the tipping point. The crown has always survived by maintaining a level of dignity and separation from the world of private commerce, and the idea that the royal name was being used in a way that could trigger legal scrutiny was an outcome they simply could not permit. It has been reported that a directive was issued, signed by King Charles himself, which effectively erased Prince Harry's standing within the official hierarchy of the firm. This was a move that went beyond the removal of military appointments or the loss of patronages. It was a constitutional response to what was perceived as a betrayal of the public trust. The royal family has long operated under a set of unwritten rules regarding transparency and service, and when those rules were allegedly bypassed in favor of private gain, the institutional response was swift. Princess Anne, who has often been described as the backbone of the family's operational standards, was reportedly at the forefront of the internal discussions that led to this decision. Her perspective was rooted in the idea that the monarchy cannot tolerate the concealment of irregularities or the distortion of service for profit. For her and for the king, the choice was between the personal feelings of a father and the national honor of a sovereign. The reporting suggests that the investigation in the United States uncovered a complex web of financial transfers and encrypted communications that the palace felt were entirely incompatible with the standards of the royal house. There were claims of unauthorized transfers involving millions of dollars and the existence of private servers used to manage communications that were never disclosed to charity regulators in either the United Kingdom or the United States. For an institution that relies on the perception of absolute integrity, these findings were more than just a scandal. They were an existential threat. Prince William was also said to be a key figure in this unfolding drama, taking a stance that was as firm as it was painful. he has often spoken about the values of duty and transparency. And in this instance, it has been reported that he stood firmly behind his father's decision, affirming that no individual, regardless of their birthright, is above the standards of the institution. As the official royal website was updated and the names were changed, the reality began to sink in for the public. Prince Harry was no longer referred to by the titles that had once commanded respect in every corner of the globe. Instead, he was listed simply as Henry Mountbatten Windsor. The loss of the HRH styling and the removal of his military honors marked the end of an era. The roles he once held with pride, such as his affiliation with the Royal Marines and his work with veteran organizations, were stripped away. The palace explained that this was not an act of personal retribution, but rather a necessary containment of risk. The crown could not be associated with actions that were under active investigation by federal agencies. It was a firewall, a way to protect the future of the monarchy by severing a link that had become too volatile to maintain. The silence from the California side of the family was deafening as these events unfolded. While Prince Harry was the primary focus of the palace's directives, the name of Meghan Markle appeared frequently in the reports concerning financial management and the use of royal trademarks. There were suggestions that the commercial team surrounding the couple had pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable, leading to a series of offshore transfers and asset protection schemes that caught the attention of tax authorities. The complexity of these financial arrangements, involving shell companies with names that echoed the very royal heritage they were trying to leave behind, created a picture of a couple trying to live in two worlds at once. But as the king's decree made clear, those two worlds were no longer allowed to overlap. In the middle of this unfolding story, Daily Dose invites you to consider the human element of a tragedy that is often viewed through the lens of power and politics. Behind every decree and every legal filing is a family that is being torn apart in the most public way imaginable. Queen Camilla was reported to be deeply troubled by the way these events were spiraling, especially as rumors began to surface about her own family's tangential connection to the social and professional circles in which the Sussexes moved. The optics of the situation were described as disastrous, with every leaked email and every reported meeting adding more fuel to a fire that the palace was desperate to extinguish. The move to strip the titles was also accompanied by a significant shift in how the royal family handles its internal discipline. For the first time in the modern era, the process was described as being handled with a level of transparency that was intended to show the public that the monarchy was moving toward a more open form of governance. The British people were given a clearer look at the mechanisms of the crown, with the palace stating that they would not operate in the shadows when national stability was at stake. This was a clear message that the old ways of managing scandal behind closed doors were gone. If there was a breach of trust, it would be dealt with in the light of day. The evidence that led to this moment was not just about money. It was also about security and the integrity of the sovereign's planning. There were reports of digital archives being migrated to private servers and sensitive military schedules being exposed to third-party access. This was a breach of security that went to the heart of the national interest. When the material was classified as institutionally destabilizing, the path forward became clear. There was no room for negotiation. Prince William reportedly filed a formal declaration of legal disassociation from his brother, a move that nullified all previous agreements regarding shared representation and mutual support. It was a final, legal goodbye between two brothers who had once been inseparable. The fallout continued to grow as more details emerged about the way the royal brand had been used in commercial contracts without authorization. The use of the royal crest and official insignias in deals with foreign firms was seen as a direct violation of the agreements made when the couple first stepped back from their roles. For the king, this was a matter of protecting the intellectual and symbolic property of the crown. A series of cease and desist letters were reportedly sent, marking a new phase of legal warfare between the palace and the couple's legal team in Los Angeles. The message was clear. The royal identity was not a commodity to be sold or licensed for private profit. As the titles were removed and the line of succession was adjusted, the impact on the next generation became a point of intense discussion within the palace. Princess Catherine and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, were said to have met privately to discuss the future of the institution and the roles of the children. They were reportedly in agreement that the era of entitlement had to end, and that the next generation must be raised with a sense of loyalty that is not used as leverage for commercial gain. There was a sense that the institutional memory of the monarchy was being protected, ensuring that it could never again be held hostage by actors who viewed their heritage as a brand rather than a duty. The weight of these decisions was visible on King Charles, who was described as weary but resolute. The order he signed was a permanent removal of style and substance, a decree that ensured that the line which turned against the house would hold no title and no shield. It was a moment of profound historical significance, marking the first full severance of a senior royal status in this manner. The headlines around the world reflected the shock of the moment, but inside the palace, it was seen as a necessary act of preservation. The monarchy has survived for centuries by adapting to the pressures of the time, and this was seen as one of the most difficult adaptations it has ever had to make. In the final stages of this process, a rare assembly was convened at Windsor Castle, a meeting that was described not as a family gathering, but as a reckoning. The senior members of the family gathered behind closed doors to review the final reports and the evidence of what was described as reputational sabotage. The findings were staggering, involving unlicensed funds and the exploitation of royal assets in ways that were never intended. The anger in the room was palpable, with Prince William reportedly expressing his frustration that the institution he serves had been treated as something to be sold. The sense of betrayal was deep, and it was shared by everyone at the table. The narrative of Prince Harry and the Crown has always been one of tension between the individual and the collective. In the early years, the public saw a young man struggling to find his place within a rigid system, a struggle that many met with empathy. But as that struggle transformed into a public and often commercialized critique of the very foundation of his family, the empathy within the palace walls began to dry up. The reporting suggests that the final decision to strip the titles was not just about what had been found in the present, but about a long-standing pattern of behavior that was deemed incompatible with the survival of the monarchy. It was the closing of a chapter that had become far too heavy for the book to hold. The spiritual and traditional aspects of the royal identity were not immune to the fallout. There were reports of requests for reviews of past ceremonies and the legitimacy of rites that were based on what was perceived as a misrepresentation of parental and royal status. This was a total and complete deconstruction of a royal life. Every patronage, every military honor, and every ceremonial link was examined and systematically removed. The palace's legal affairs unit moved with a level of speed and precision that suggested they had been preparing for this possibility for a long time. They were closing the gates, and they were doing so with a finality that left no room for a return. In California, the impact of these decisions was reportedly felt as a severe blow to the Sussexes' commercial and social standing. Without the royal styling and the official association with the crown, many of the doors that had once opened automatically began to close. Streaming platforms and publishers were said to be pausing negotiations, wary of the reputational risk that now followed the couple. The brand, once seen as a powerful tool for global influence, was suddenly viewed as a liability. This was the practical reality of the king's decree. A name that was once a shield had become a burden. Beyond the legalities, there is the matter of the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. She had always hoped for a reconciliation, but she also believed in the sanctity of the crown above all else. The current actions taken by King Charles are seen by many as a fulfillment of that duty, a way to ensure that the work of her 70-year reign is not undone by the short-term ambitions of a few. It is a harsh reality to face, but it is one that the institution seems to have embraced. The focus has shifted back to the core values of the monarchy, service, silence, and the preservation of the constitutional order. As we reach the end of this journey here on Daily Dose, we are left to look at a landscape that has been forever changed. The House of Windsor has made its choice, prioritizing the survival and the integrity of the crown over the personal bonds that once held it together. The image of the royal family has been reshaped, moving away from the scandals of the past and toward a future defined by a harder, more disciplined approach to service and duty. Prince Harry is now a figure on the outside, a man who carries the weight of a lineage he can no longer claim, living in a world that he sought to build for himself, but at a cost that is only now becoming clear. The final messages from the palace have been ones of continuity and moral clarity. The transfer of symbolic items and the expanded roles of those who stayed behind serve as a reminder that the monarchy is larger than any one individual. The public sentiment seems to have shifted in favor of this firm stance, with many feeling that the institution was right to protect itself from further exploitation. The gates are closed, and the world has been told that while forgiveness may be possible in a private sense, the public institution will never again be fooled by the same tactics. Even as new leadership roles are conferred upon Prince William and Princess Catherine, the shadow of the past remains. There is a sense that the work of rebuilding the royal image is only just beginning. The departure of one member leaves a void that must be filled by the dedication and the unwavering presence of the others. It is a weight that the Prince and Princess of Wales seem prepared to carry, showing the world that the monarchy remains a stable and enduring force, even in the face of unprecedented internal conflict. The story of the Windsor family is one of survival against the odds. They have faced wars, social revolutions, and internal scandals that would have brought down any other institution. Yet they remain. This latest chapter is perhaps one of the most painful, as it involves the total severance of a son and a brother from the fabric of the crown. It is a reminder that the crown does not just grant privilege, it demands a sacrifice that many would find impossible to give. For King Charles, that sacrifice was the bond with his youngest son. In the quiet moments that follow such a monumental shift, one cannot help but wonder about the silence that now exists where there was once conversation. When the titles are gone and the shields are lowered, what remains of the man who was once a prince? We are left with a lingering image of a family that has chosen a path of distance and a crown that has chosen a path of survival. It is a story that continues to unfold, even as the official records are closed and the names are rewritten. If the weight of history is no longer there to hold you up, where do you find the strength to stand on your own? And in the years to come, when the noise of the investigation fades and only the memory of the loss remains, will anyone truly be able to say that the price of the crown was worth the cost of the sun? How do you imagine the conversation would go if they were ever to meet again in total privacy, without the titles or the cameras? Since you're looking for more depth, would you like me to expand further on the specific reactions from other global leaders or the detailed history of how previous royals have navigated this kind of total severance?
If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to know. The truth continues tomorrow. Until then, this was your Daily Dose.